So it's been a while since I've done a chat from the engine bay, but this one's quite serious. We went out to sea hoping to go on a short journey, but we had an overheat on one engine. I changed the impeller at £50 plus per time. That's not a smart idea, but the impeller I took out was in really good condition and I couldn't see any real problems with it. So that's an ongoing thing that I've got to investigate. I've changed the impeller and that did bring the temperature of that engine down, but the second problem occurred with the port engine, and that occurred when we arrived back in port itself. Now this vessel had the tanks replaced when it was in its previous ownership, and I initially thought that maybe the tanks were a lot smaller, but I've been assured that they were the same size, and I know that the tanks were full of diesel. And so it was very odd to me that while we were being churned about at sea, the engines didn't stop, and it wasn't until we came into the calmness of port it shuddered. We left Lowestoft on a beautifully bright spring day. It was slightly windy, and as we pushed through the piers of the port, we found that the seas were slightly choppy. This was ideal because we really needed to put Friday night through her paces. We needed to find out how the engines were going to perform and how the boat was going to perform as well. It was also Hamish's first journey at sea in a fast boat, so it was good to see that Hamish was really settled. He didn't seem alarmed and he was really enjoying the journey. But it wasn't long into the journey before we started noticing that we had some problems. First of all, the trim tabs wouldn't equal up properly, and then we noticed an overheat on one of the engines and the alarm started sounding. The trim tabs turned out to be nothing more than just not understanding how they worked on this particular boat. However, the overheat was more worrying, so on a choppy sea I got down into the engine bay, felt that the starboard water pump housing was warm, and changed the impeller, and it was at that point we decided to go back into port and call it a day. We came back into Lowestoft port with no further difficulty, but whilst we were waiting for Bascule Bridge to lift, the port engine suddenly stopped, and there was nothing I could do to get it to restart, so we limped our way back to our home berth, and then over the next 3 or 4 days I had the biggest nightmare with this boat so far. Am I horrible?
Yes.
Why?
Because you're making me feel sick.
Why?
Always wobbling.
Just taking a little diversion off my route today to visit one of my favourite boat yards, which is Jones at St Ives. Jones's boat yard has been around a very long time and I like the place. It's just a fantastic little yard. It's got a boat sales berth there as well, but also a lovely little chandlery where they stock just about everything. I'm sure I'm going to be able to find some spares that I need for our Volvo KAD32 engines, but I'm also keen to see if they have any interesting bits and bobs. I'd like to buy an inflatable canoe. I've got an urge to do that. I was going to build one, I was going to build an easy canoe, but now we've got the camper van as well, I'm thinking maybe an inflatable canoe. Unfortunately, I've not been able to have the browse around I would hope to have done. The staff are very friendly, but they're operating a click and collect service only. They're not prepared to open the chandlery at the moment. They've been told by local officials that they can't. It's very disappointing, as other places are open. But I also respect the fact that many businesses are being given contradictory information, which are preventing them from operating the business as they would want to. It's a very sad thing, but it's still worth visiting. Definitely come here. Once back at the boat, the first job was to change the main filter for the port side engine. I remembered to prime this all the way to the top before refitting, before moving on to the secondary fine filter, which I noticed wasn't a Volvo part. I changed it for a Volvo filter, identified the bleed screw and also the pump behind the pump assembly. The fuel from the filters didn't look too bad. There were a few bits and pieces in the fuel, but nothing I wouldn't expect when doing a filter change. Once the secondary fuel filter is in place, the next job to do is to loosen the bolt on the top of it. This has a groove in it, so when you use the primer pump located behind the filter, it allows the fuel to be drawn up through the filter and out of the top. And that's what you want to do. You want to start pumping until you get clear fuel and no air coming out of the top of the filter. And I did this repeatedly, pumping, and then I pumped some more. Once I had a good stream of clear fuel coming out of the top of the filter, I did the bolt back up. Now this would normally be enough with a KAD series engine to draw the fuel through the system with a high pressure fuel pump and turning the engine over using the starter motor. However, I did this and the starter motor turned and turned and turned. I repeated this whole process again and it still didn't restart. And even though I changed batteries, the starter motor started clicking, and it was that point I gave up and I went home again. Whilst I was at home, I had a really good think about the problems I still had with the boat. Fundamentally, I still wasn't getting fuel into the port side engine, but worse still, when I cranked the engine over, the starter motor clicked, even though the batteries were fully charged, as if the starter motor was failing. However, I checked that and tested it, and the starter motor was working fine. So that led me to believe there may be a problem with the ignition barrel, because as I turned the ignition barrel and moved it around, it seemed to make a contact. Secondly, I thought about the relay, the 40 amp relay that was within the black box, and I needed to look at both of those. So I've got a problem trying to turn the port side engine over. It clicks on the starter motor, but I've tested the starter motor and I know that that's good. So I've taken the ignition barrel out and I'm going to clean up the contacts on that. If that doesn't work and it's still clicking and not making a contact when I wobble the key, I'm going to swap it over with the starboard side ignition barrel, and if that corrects the problem, then I know I've got to source a new ignition barrel. If not, I'm going to start looking at the relays. Thankfully, the problem with the starting circuit turned out to be little more than dry contacts in a relay on the black box of the KAD series engines. It was an easily fixed problem. However, it presented a vital learning opportunity to get to know the systems of our new to us boat. We then turned our attention to the injection system, loosening the injectors one by one and bleeding the air through, and then, magically, the engine started. So as you can hear on this rainy day, we finally got both engines started and we sorted the ignition problem out. The ignition problem wasn't the starter motor, it's a relay in the black box. We've changed the relay over and the starting system is working fine. Getting the engine started was a lot more difficult. We had to bleed through every single injector. It really wasn't an easy job, and it took two people, and it's taken us most of the afternoon, but the engines are running fine now, so fingers crossed that that will be everything that I find out about this boat. Join us again soon on Love Life, Love Boats, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you like what we're doing. Thank you.